Okay, well, how can we understand what the factors are? What do we need to address besides behavioral health treatment to reduce the risk of criminal justice involvement? So, to do that, they take us through this coping relapse model, which is something that was developed by other folks prior to this article, and something that the authors pointed to as a good place to start when trying to understand what these multiple factors are that place them at risk for criminal justice involvement. So, um, so the coping relapse model emphasizes the relationship between a person's ability to cope, and coping behaviors can include criminal cognition, values, attitudes, and external factors. So we're going to talk a little bit more about criminal cognitions, but these are these are my words, not from the article, but these are interrelated and acted upon and influenced by these external factors. So we think about those social determinants of health from the beginning of the course, these aspects. So when people don't, when they have insufficient housing, insufficient occupational fulfillment, access to jobs, when they're underemployed or unemployed, when they have poor social supports or no social supports, um, when they have uh, little to no transportation, little to no income. These are all things in this coping relapse model that push upon people not just and not just affect their health in a social determinants of health type of way, but actually affect and impact the way they think about the world around them. And so when people are exposed to a long period of time, um, these external factors and stressful events such as victimization, right, of all different kinds, um, people are much more likely to think in a criminal way to get their needs met, and this affects their values and their attitudes, right? Um, how they feel about the world around them. If they see the world around them as a place that's threatening and uh, not worthy of trust, and in fact may be predatory towards them, they're much more likely going to have a mindset about the world around them that is negative and hostile, and their behavior will follow. So that's kind of the idea behind the coping relapse model. So to dig into this coping relapse model a little bit further, the authors of the framework, not the article, but the authors of those who authored this model, to help us better understand, break it down even further into person level factors and place level factors. Okay, so place level factors include all the social determinants and structural oppression aspects that we talked about earlier in this course, and that hopefully are kind of concepts that are discussed throughout all of your curriculum here. So in your MSW program. So and then the person level factors are uh, kind of in some ways downstream effects of the place level factors, but they can also be their own kind of exacerbating factors. So people who are exposed to trauma or victimized, um, are more and in are coping using drugs of abuse to help cope. Um, all of those things are going to make someone much more susceptible to mental illness, like depression, right? If they're under a constant state of stress, which is further exacerbated by exposure to trauma or victimization or both, they're much more likely to uh, use drugs of abuse to cope and to try to to get to they're much more likely to fall into that trap, if you will, of having some short-term immediate relief, but with longer and more serious consequence, as kind of part of the nature of addiction. Um, and as we talked about, these folks are much more likely going to uh, have a mindset with the world that makes them much more likely to choose behaviors that lead them to criminal behavior. And all of these affect someone's mental health and depression and even psychotic uh, disorders and psychotic symptoms can come if a person is stressed and unhealthy uh, to the point and not unhealthy in that their environmental factors have eroded their health, victimization and trauma have eroded their health. They've you know inadvertently further eroded their health through coping with through addictions, and this has kind of colored their view of the world in a very negative way, making them more likely to engage in criminal behavior. And all this um, has a tremendous negative impact on a person's mental health and overall health. And this is a really, I pulled this line out of the article because I just thought it was really spot on and something we should be talking about in all of our clinical classes as well as our policy classes is that uh, stress as an interaction of person and place risk factors. And to take that a step further, these person and place risk factors, the stress has a direct correlation on our overall health. And that is not just our mental health, that's our physiological health, right? Things like hypertension. Hypertension is highly influenced by stress. So I bolded this here because not only is this kind of the the kind of the ultimate summary and conclusion of the coping relapse model, but really kind of the bottom line, if you will, with this with the entire article, which is that risk of criminal justice involvement involves a confluence, a gathering of person and place factors, of which mental illness is just a part of it. And so they further break down this. Well, what do we mean by direct, right? So this if the concept is that criminal justice risk is a confluence of person place factors which include mental illness, what do we mean when we say it directly and indirectly places people at risk? So okay, well, this is how we define that, right? Meaning the authors of the coping relapse model. So direct means that untreated symptoms of a mental illness directly cause criminal behavior. If someone is psychotic or disoriented, either through illness or intoxication, they are much more likely not just necessarily even engage in criminal behavior. They're just much more likely to kind of run afoul, if you will, with law enforcement, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be someone robbing a liquor store. It can be someone in a compromised state out in the community, which frightens other people. They call law enforcement. Law enforcement, particularly when they're not properly trained and prepared to manage a situation like that, to interact with that person, and see if it's possible to get them health care versus arrest. um, Bad things happen, right? And not just arrest, but other undesirable outcomes as well. So, and then indirect is the concept of people um, with mental illness, whether or not they are symptomatic, may engage in criminal behavior for the same reasons that people without mental illness engage. And this is a big part of the author's assertion for the article, which is one of the fundamental reasons why, in their opinion, why just getting better access to behavioral health care isn't enough, or perhaps even nearly enough, to reduce the risk of criminal justice involvement at a community or individual level, is because that's not the primary reason why people end up engaging in criminal behavior and getting involved in the criminal justice system. That, in fact, the reasons why are these broader psychosocial, social determinant, structural oppression reasons, of which mental illness is just a one piece of that puzzle. So, and by the way, we're kind of seeing the coping relapse model and kind of moving back into the author's novel documentation and writing and assertions in the article here. And so they go on to state that mental illness is mediated by criminal justice criminogenic risk factors. So, in other words, these kind of broader in place factors influence or exacerbate mental illness, and that's coping with drugs and alcohol, exposure to trauma, and particularly victimization type trauma, direct victimization, I mean, and particularly without the proper trauma treatment, right? Financial stress, insufficient income to survive, underemployment or lack of employment. These are all things that weigh on a person and can just reduce a person's health and either cause a mental illness or exacerbate it. And then that becomes part of the criminogenic risk factors. And so, and specifically here in this data point that the articles have, what they're relating this concept of antisocial behavior or criminal behavior, or behavior that is destructive, right, to either a person destructive or destructive to the general community. That these are things that are common factors among people who engage in antisocial behavior.